About a week ago, I was talking to a mom of a 1-year-old infant who had not started introducing table foods. And what was her reason? The baby had not yet gotten the teeth yet, and she was scared of choking. This is a very common complaint I hear where the kids are on purees for 4 to 6 months at a time only because they have that fear of choking, which is rightfully so, right? If this sounds familiar, you're at the right place. I'm Dr. Lumfrendi. I'm a pediatrician and founder of Generational Wellbeing. I am glad you're here. So today we're going to talk about safety, fresh foods that you can introduce to your infant without that terrifying notion of choking or having your kid gag and maybe something really bad happening. Because as a parent, it is hard, right? Where you know what's right to do, you know you to start introducing foods, but there's that nagging fear in the back of your mind where it's like, how can I protect my kid? Am I protecting or allowing them to develop well? It is a very familiar problem where at least 40% of first time parents do experience that feeding anxiety with their foods, and 80% of them feel helpless about not knowing what to do should that kid end up choking. Now, the problem here is that if we're not introducing the foods and introducing variety early, then the first thing is we're not really helping our kids to develop those oral motor skills first. And then second, we're missing that critical window within that 6 to 9 month where they want to eat different foods and they're acceptable to different textures and flavors and tastes. Once you miss that critical window, and then you end up with a kid who is either refusing foods down the line, especially as they become that toddler age group where they become extremely selective for the kinds of foods they want, and then maybe eating disorders down the line. So it is important then to make sure that we are introducing those foods and we're introducing variety early. But what do you need to know about introducing foods to your infant? The AAP recommends starting foods anywhere from 4 to 6 months, depending on your kid's readiness. As the kid has to have good neck control, sitting with support, and there's no thrust reflex. So if your kid has met all those three criteria, then it's okay to advance and start introducing foods. Now, once we get to that part, the biggest fear I see is that fear of choking or gagging. Now, what is gagging? Gagging is really not the enemy, but a protective or built-in protective device to help protect the airway of the infants, of everybody actually. Now, infants, their gag reflex is a bit farther in their tongue, so they're gag more easily than adults. So sometimes if you see your infant gagging on something or new foods, they're not necessarily choking. It's not that they don't like it. They'll make the funny faces, they'll make the gag and spit it up, or sometimes they may cough while they're doing that. Those are all responses to a gag reflex, which is a protective or built-in protective device to protect the airway, as opposed to choking where that is scary, right? Where there's no sound at all, there's wide eye, you can see fear in the space, and they're not breathing. Because the other thing with gagging is with all of that, they're still breathing comfortably versus with choking infant where there's silence, it's wide eye, it's fear, and there's no breathing. If that's the case, of course, you want to start giving those back pats and then calling 911 because your kid is choking. But in most cases, it's just a gag reflex we see and we think it's choking, and because of that, we're afraid to continue introducing the foods that they need. Gagging is not the enemy, but it's a built-in protective process for us. The next step then is like most of the time with choking, it's about food preparation. Most kids, if you prepare the food well, it really saves at least 90% of those choking episodes. Now, what do I mean by food preparations? One, you want to make sure you're offering the safe food options. You want to avoid any foods that are round or hard or small. Those tiny food pieces where if they pick it, it can easily slide back and then obstruct the airway. So of course you want to make sure you don't offer those things like nuts and seeds or popcorn or grapes. Those are nice and round, and sometimes they'll try to bite into it, but those are all choking hazards. Hot dogs, we've seen a lot of choking with hot dogs too. You don't want to offer those coin-sized hot dogs to your kids. Now, if you want to offer foods, then you may want to then cut it into nice parallel slices where it's thin slices where even if they were to bite onto, they hold on and bite onto those thin slices, it's going through and through without causing the choking. The next thing is you want to make sure it's nice and steamed where if you're pressing it with your finger and thumb, it's soft enough where it's easy to crush. That way you know it's soft enough where they can actually bite and practice those oral motor skills with their gums, even for the kids who have no teeth. That way, if they're biting it with those gums, they're practicing their oral motor skills, and it's soft enough where if it's going back, it's sliding all the way through and through. So, and then you also want to stack up on those really high safe first foods. Avocados are good options, bananas are good options, sometimes ripe pears are good options. So all those foods that you can cut in thin slices, it's nice and soft. The kid can play, explore with the foods, because remember, eating ends in the mouth, but it starts with that exploring. They want to touch it, they want to feel it, sometimes even smell it, let it touch their skin. That's all of that goes into that exploration of new foods and becoming familiar with the textures and flavors, and then eventually eating it. The other thing, and other reason I've seen a lot of parents really hesitant about introducing foods is that fear of allergies. But recent research, well, not quite recent now, it's been about 10 years ago, they did a LEAP study that showed that an introduction of peanuts or highly allergenic foods like peanut butter early on really helps reduce the risk of developing allergies by at least 70%. So then now that means that what we're talking about, introducing those allergenic foods, in the past we used to say wait until they're 1 year old before doing it. Now we're recommending it starting at 6 months old, because the earlier you introduce those foods, it builds immunity rather than create allergies. Because once you miss that critical window again, then you are run a high risk of them seeing that new foods at a later time, then increasing their risk of allergies. So you want to introduce even the highly allergenic foods at an early time. So foods like peanut butter puffs was used in that study. You can use nut butters, make it in a puree and introduce it. You can introduce eggs and fish and chicken and all those things that we tend to avoid in that first year of life because we're kind of concerned about the allergies. But then introducing those earlier really helps and goes a long way with helping them build immunity rather than causing them to have allergies. So how then can you introduce the foods? You usually recommend that introduce it 3 days in a row and then rotate it out at a certain rotation schedule to consistently offer it. What do I mean by that? So if you're introducing eggs, you can do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I usually say when you're starting with those, do it in the mornings. That way you're observing if there's some sort of an allergy or vomiting, you're there and you can see it. And then come back and then reintroduce that food at least at a regular consistency, whether it's once a week or something like that. That way the kids becomes familiar, the body becomes familiar and knows that that's a safe food. Now, once we talk about allergies, then any kid who has an allergy, it can develop anywhere from within the first 2 hours of being exposed to that particular food. And you see stuff like hives, difficulty breathing or vomiting or swelling of the tongue or mouth with those kids. Then they have allergies. You want to call your child's doctor to address and talk about further testing where that comes in. Now, choking again is not an allergy. If it's just the spitting up of the food, it's not an allergy. And there's some kids who have just a contact irritation around the mouth without any swelling or all the rash or vomiting. That's more so a contact reaction versus a true allergy. So knowing all this now, so what can you do? First, if you're really concerned about the choking part, and if that's the main thing that is really stopping you from introducing the foods, you may want to take a first aid class for babies. There's so many of those classes out there. That way, at least it gives you that calm and safety, knowing that if in that rare case that it happens, you know what to do and you're prepared. And that gives you that sense of calm that you can calmly introduce the foods to your kids without that anxiety or fear, because our kids are really feeding off of that anxiety and fear. So if we're going to the table with that caution and constantly wiping or constantly holding them back from trying things, it really interferes with their relationship with food at an early time, where food becomes that time where any new thing, there's some sort of anxiety related to the food. Second, you want to stock up on healthier, the very safe first food options. That way you have enough to offer variety at a certain rate, maybe every other day. Offer a new food and a new texture, a new flavor. That way they can start exploring and working on those oral motor skills. And then third, another big reason why we really say rotating is that it lowers the risk of that metal exposure. We are seeing over the last few years that baby foods will have high metal, especially the baby rice cereal. Most of the brands have either trace metals in it or arsenic or lead. But if you're rotating the foods and not giving that same baby cereal every single day, it reduces that toxin load. So imagine if your baby was getting a product that, like the rice, that has arsenic in it, that level will build up over time. But if you're rotating the products, you're rotating the brands, you're rotating the foods too, it helps reduce the toxic load and then increase that and expand their palate, where they're able to eat more foods. So imagine if with all of this you have a meal time where it's not stressful. The mealtime becomes not that time where you're on alert, on guard, anxiously looking at your kid and trying to make sure they don't choke, but it's a time where you can put in strings of chicken and allow your kids to explore it, or have little strings where the kid is exploring, you're eating, and it's a more relaxing atmosphere rather than that time where like, it's so stressful. It makes life less stressful. It makes parenting more of a time where you're really enjoying raising your child, as opposed to the stress that goes with making the right decision, because our children need more so that calm and nurturing than that perfection that we sometimes want for them. I hope you found this helpful. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Tag your mom friend along and leave a comment in the comment box if you have any questions. Thank you for listening. I'm Dr. Lum.